If you turn on the news right now, the narrative about the 2026 Iran war seems totally wrapped up. The commentary says Washington and Jerusalem got bogged down, that after launching Operation Epic Fury back on February 28th, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and setting off months of intense exchanges, the Trump administration ended up right where America always ends up in the Middle East, stuck in an unresolved war of attrition. The media frames it as Iran successfully outlasting the West. I want to show you a different version of this story, because if you look past the daily headlines and actually calculate the physical, strategic, and nuclear balance of power today, as of July 27, 2026, the evidence points to a completely different conclusion. Trump isn't getting bogged down. He is systematically winning this war. To understand why everyone is getting this wrong, you have to understand one specific pattern. Scholars call it escalation dominance, the ability to raise the stakes of a conflict so high and so decisively that your adversary runs out of moves before you run out of options. For decades, Tehran's whole strategy was based on making the U.S. afraid of escalation. If you strike us, they warned, we will set the regional economy on fire. In 2026, the White House called their bluff, and every time Iran has tried to raise the pain threshold, Washington has pushed back harder, effectively breaking the structural pillars that held up the Islamic Republic's power. Let's break down the evidence across 4 critical fronts. Let's start with the big one, Iran's nuclear breakout timeline. For years, critics argued airstrikes couldn't destroy underground sites like Fordo, that you'd only delay enrichment by a few months while driving it deeper underground. Well, look at what the actual nuclear forensics say. According to a June 2026 assessment by nuclear inspector David Albright at the Institute for Science and International Security, Iran is currently not enriching at all. Over 22,000 centrifuges were obliterated alongside 10 key conversion, R&D, and research facilities. The breakout timeline didn't shrink. It was blown out from a few short weeks to a year or more, with the regime's technical personnel severely disrupted. Now, to be completely transparent, the U.S. Department of Defense claims that over 80% of Iran's fixed ballistic missile launch sites and 90% of its naval combatants have been neutralized. Independent analysts like the Congressional Research Service note that U.S. material costs have been high, over $29 billion spent and dozens of aircraft lost. But here is the difference. America can replace hardware. Iran cannot replace its entire nuclear and naval infrastructure under an active blockade. The second pillar of Iran's defense was its network of proxies, the axis of resistance. The theory was that if you hit Tehran, Hezbollah and Iraqi militias would rain down hell, except that network has broken down. Afshan Ostavar, a leading military scholar on the IRGC at the Naval Postgraduate School, documented that with Quds force supply lines severed through Syria and Iraq, these proxy groups have effectively decoupled from Tehran. They aren't launching massive counter-offensives to save Iran. They're hoarding remaining stockpiles just to survive locally. And inside Iran, when Ali Khamenei was eliminated on February 28th, the Assembly of Experts quickly appointed his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the new supreme leader. But tracking by the Institute for the Study of War reveals a regime operating in sheer panic. Mojtaba was injured in the initial strikes and has stayed out of sight, leaving a fractured military junta running a state with zero domestic legitimacy. Navigating these massive geopolitical shifts requires understanding deep historical trends and, frankly, filtering through a mountain of daily noise and conflicting intelligence reports. Which brings us to today's sponsor. Seamless transition into sponsor message, e.g., an information learning platform or research tool. Okay, so let's get back to what you clicked on this video for. How is Trump winning if the war is still ongoing in late July 2026? This is where the argument usually flips. Critics point to the economic front. As David J. Lynch reported in the Washington Post, Iran's primary remaining move was to disrupt shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, drive up global oil prices, and drag the West into a prolonged maritime war. When the April ceasefire broke down, Iran tried to force commercial ships to follow regime-mandated protocols. Their bet was simple: Western voters won't tolerate $100 a barrel oil, and Trump will back down. Instead, the White House pulled out of the June Memorandum of Understanding, enforced a full U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports, and slapped security tariffs on rogue shipping. By maintaining escalation dominance, the U.S. proved that Tehran cannot impose economic pain without taking far worse military damage in return. By late July, oil prices had stabilized, and talks began resuming strictly on American terms. Iran wanted an asymmetric war of attrition. What they got was total strategic isolation. Now, to be completely fair to the analysts arguing that Iran is outlasting the U.S., their case isn't built on nothing. Coercion theorists like Robert Papp at the University of Chicago have shown for decades that air campaigns alone rarely force a determined regime to surrender completely. And as Ali Vaez at the International Crisis Group points out, Iran doesn't need to destroy the US military to win. They just need to keep firing enough low-cost drones and harassing shipping long enough for Western political patience to run out. If Iran can absorb massive structural damage, hide its remaining nuclear know-how, and outweight the current political cycle in Washington, they can theoretically rebuild. When you zoom out from the battlefield tactics of Operation Epic Fury, a broader pattern becomes clear. Winning in modern conflict rarely looks like a formal surrender on a battleship. It looks like taking away your opponent's ability to shape the future. Before February 28, 2026, Iran was a threshold nuclear state with an unbroken network of proxies surrounding Israel and holding global energy corridors hostage. Today, its enrichment infrastructure is in ruins. Its regional proxies are fighting for local self-preservation. Its leadership is shattered, and its naval forces are largely destroyed. The conflict remains unresolved, and the friction is real. But by refusing to play by the old rules of escalation, the US strategy fundamentally reshaped the balance of power in the Middle East. Thanks for watching. See you next time.